Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It's our day with Thornwea Davis, where we discuss everything from deaf culture and astrology to just astrology to, I don't know, it just really depends on the day. Today we have an interesting topic, which is um, different Mercury signs and sign language and the expression of those different Mercury signs in sign language. So Thorne will be our expert on this. I'm just the host today. I mean, I'm happy to share whatever I can, Thorne's saying. Okay, so should we just start with Aries and then go through that way? Or we could start with Pisces to be crazy. Why not? Well, let's start with Aries. Okay. So, in sign language, which is an expression of Mercury energy, because that's the throat chakra, which goes out the arms and hands, right? It's not only spoken language. So, what does a Mercury in Aries look like in sign language? Okay, I was thinking about that, and I would envision if I was Mercury in Aries, what would that look like? I was trying to imagine that. And since Aries moves fast and it thinks fast, all over the place, it's all over the place. It could be kind of random, random, not necessarily cohesive. So I was thinking of maybe the signs could be fast or choppy, uh, or um confusing, there's not like non sequiturs, things are all over the place. And there's a thought here, a thought over here, and there's, connection with that. But excited, like because Aries gets excited and so it's fast. And so it would be kind of in a hurry to say a bunch of things, but where's that flow, So and it would depend on what the sun sign is because you have a few different options there. You can have like a Taurus sun with Mercury and Aries, which would be more slow. But if it was an Aries with Mercury and Aries, maybe that's very fast and kinetic, like, yeah, that's double, double. Yeah. What's it look like when deaf people like fight in sign language? Because maybe like Mercury and Aries would get in some fights. Well, if the person's deaf and they're Mercury and Aries, and there's a fight, maybe they'd be signing really fast, like it would be pepper. Like if you think about like spices, they'd be signing really fast like this, and then they'd be done, and then they'd feel better. It's like you have to like let it go. It's like let it go, let it all out, and then all of a sudden they're calm. So it's like if that it's a similar idea. So they'd have kind of a spicy temper. So they're, like putting it out there in that way. It could be blunt as well. It could just be really direct and maybe it seems offensive, but it's not intending to be offensive. So, because it's Aries, it's typically very direct. It's just to the point, but they don't think about, the delivery per se and how that would be, affecting other people. So, all right. All right, interesting. Okay, so we really only have 5 minutes per sign, so it's going to be quick. Okay, so moving on to Mercury in Taurus, that's more slow and steady, but what do you think? How would you describe that? It's very chill. It's more thoughtful, more of like chewing on like cows chew on cud, it's that idea of like chewing on things and how would I see things and what words and being more expressive. And then the next thing comes out and it's more deliberate expression and very precise, uh, with, just different, pieces of the puzzle, but wants to make it, look good. There's a flow to it, it's aesthetic because Taurus is really all about aesthetics. It wants to look good and be expressed well. Yeah. In English, Mercury and Taurus people can be very poetic, like saying things in like a flowery way, like yeah, kind of elaborate. Um, and yeah, like with sign language, it would be slower, like like putting it out there like this. Yes, for sure. Do you know any Mercury and Taurus deaf people? I do know some Sun and Taurus people, but specifically Mercury in Taurus, I'm sure I do, but I don't know who exactly. But yeah, at this current moment. So what about sign language poetry? What do you think? Do you think they have that? What's that look like? Well, it depends on the artist, and or the author or the poet. But there's a lot of styles. So we have some very formal signed poems, and then some like ASL slams where it's really quick and it's coming out really fast and it's really impulsive, that kind of extemporaneous style. So there's different ones, for sure. Do you think that a Mercury and Taurus would want to make pictures with the signs? Like, um, yeah, it's more theatrical, kind of visual, descriptive, kind of flowery, language. Yeah, like many Mercury and Taurus people in English are literary. What's that look like in sign language? If you want to look at a book or, a literary something like an author, like in the author's mind, scholarship, it would be something that type of expression, especially if the person is already an artist or they're a creative person or something that's perfect with how they express that in sign language, and descriptive. Now, some people critique Mercury and Taurus. They say it's slow. Okay, it's like a slow thought process. Of course, astrologers say that every chart is perfect under the sun, and but do you think, like in balance, he would say that Mercury in Taurus is not very vocal. So do you think that the deaf person with Mercury in Taurus is more quiet and not really fast? I mean, not necessarily more quiet, but maybe more reserved. You know, um, Depends on how they grew up, on what their environment was that was feeding. There's a lot of factors with the communication style. But maybe they would struggle with opening up, and expressing themselves. But I do feel that with practice, they they could remediate that and improve that and to have more comfort in expressing themselves. Yeah. I don't think we should expect a Mercury in Taurus person to be similar to a Mercury in Gemini, which we'll talk about next, which is very fast. And I think, Mercury in Taurus people are supposed to be slower, like maybe a stone mason. They lift up stones all day and they have a slower thought process because if their mind was moving so fast, they would get bored with that process. You know what I mean? So the slower mind can be a benefit to some jobs. Yes, and just adding with that, the slower mind process, it connect with the craft work, like how to show that value of how to express that I showed up and I did this and I had the thought structure to do that. So, yeah. Okay, let's talk about Mercury in Gemini, where it's at home. So this is a strong Mercury, and this is your Mercury, right? Yes, with the sun in the 11th house, yeah, in Gemini. Yeah. So what's that look like? We can see your signing style, but it's true for sure. Um I do think about Mercury in Gemini as a little bit similar to Mercury, well, in Sag, because they like to tell stories and they'll give you a good story, but it's a different of how the story is told or how the storytelling shows up. Because um, I would imagine Mercury in Sag is more of an adventure kind of thing. They're very excited and they're telling a story in that way. But the Mercury in Gemini is more of a philosophy, story, scholarship, discussion type of expression, and they show up in that way. It can be short, also, a lot of connections of for the overall view. So yeah. Do you think I'm going to say something controversial, but do you think Mercury in Mercury and Gemini deaf people are more skilled with English also because of the linguistics. I think that the mind moves very fast with Gemini Mercury. I would say that the mind with Mercury and Gemini is more adept at picking up language. Yes. And more able and willing to think between those languages and transition. And then also the cultural overlays there. And yeah, I can um, speak from my own experience. Some advanced, I have some advanced level with English or other language equivalency. So yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, people always say it's the culture, like what if you grow up with parents who sign or if you have language deprivation, that will affect your communication style. And though the astrology layer says a lot about how a person communicates, I know deaf people who have grown up with language deprivation AF and their parents don't sign and they have Mercury and Gemini and they're just signing and they're English speaking English and they can't hear much. And I know a deaf woman who is she's deaf, but she seems hearing and she's Mercury and Gemini and she's a audiologist and she's very just she talks a lot with her voice and it's just a quick mental framework. I mean, you know, so and part of that I would suspect is because Gemini is in general, Gemini typically has that ability to kind of take on different roles and test and play with different parts where it's like how can I connect with this part of language and that thought process and how can I internalize that and switch to other part of language and learn there and internalize that. Oh, how can I make that connection and there and internalize that? Yeah. So I would say that deaf people who have Mercury and Gemini have that ability to kind of code switch between languages and cultures more in both. And for me, it's kind of scientific. It's that the humors, which is the blood type of a Mercury and Gemini, is different, where they have more oxygenized humors. So the blood is more full of oxygen. It's like, and the throat chakra is blue with this like it's like this oxygen rich environment where the brain just has the ability to pick up more linguistics. I'm not saying that's better than another Mercury. I'm just speaking the astro facts. I mean, from what I see. Right. And plus I do look at where Mercury and Gemini is the expression of a map. That's a different kind of connections, like it's like a web and there's all these different connections and they always are in process and they're in synthesizing those parts and everything that would connect with the at the end of the day and then your mind kind of rests. Well, I think another possibly controversial thing to discuss is like when deaf people get cochlear implants. I think a Mercury in Taurus might accept that different than a Mercury in Gemini. I mean, it's how their mind processes and synthesizes information is just different. Well, and not only the mind processing things, but also the body. Because Taurus is very earthy, so it's very solid with even the bone structure here, and this area is very Taurus part of the body right here. So if there's a cochlear implant, I would imagine more it's like irritating for that. It's like annoying for that ear, that part of the body is to accept that. Whereas the Mercury and Gemini, the deaf person who has a cochlear implant, that part of the body might be more willing to accept but still have its own type of maybe overstimulation because Gemini is very aware of everything and is moves really quickly. So with that mind, that's one challenge I could envision with that. Yeah, those are good points. Yeah, of accepting the body, accepting. I love that point is the body type and how dense it is. It's like changes how it accepts the vibrations even, that's just interesting. And I'm not trying to be controversial. It's just that astrology sometimes has a different perspective and that's what we're here to do on this channel. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Mercury in Cancer is an interesting one. So what do you think of that? I would envision that how in sign language it's more soft and more gentle, not just blunt, but more like thoughtful and more just compassionate and just gentle. It seems that maybe it's more sensitive to being saying things like that. It might, how to get that feeling out, because cancer is very emotional, it's very sensitive internally. So it's like, how can I feel safe to actually open up? And I can imagine that could be a challenge for the Mercury in Cancer, expressing themselves. Yeah, and I think the signing style, because it's water in the chest, it's like your throat chakra is tied to the water of the chest. So it's like there's going to be a more of a flow style, like yes, a soft style. It's like and just like more makes me think of like water in the hands, like people have like sticky hands. Yeah, like they're kind of like sweaty palms or whatever, but it's like, that makes sense. But yeah, but more of a flow style and integrating information through the kind of water area. And so it's more yeah, yeah, it's heart centered. It's heart centered. Yeah. I can see the difference between like Aries Mercury and Cancer Mercury. Aries would just be like blunt, like bleh, and then the Mercury and Cancer would be like more like this, kind of feel. Yeah, it's like a flow style kind of, and where Aries would just be Mercury is like I said, it's like peppering things. It's just like coming at you like this, but it's not. It doesn't stop and slow down to make sure that all the thoughts are connecting. Whereas the Cancer Mercury would be more. It's slower with the feeling, but it loses that connection quickly. That delivery. So yeah. Okay, cool. Next, it would be Mercury and Leo, which is another fire sign. So how is that different, similar to Aries, I guess? So Aries is, like I said, it's short and fast and quick. And Leo, I can just imagine it. It's very much like dramatic, with flair, yeah, always with flair. There's kind of a shining thing. They don't need the focus on them necessarily, but it's like they say like, "Oh my God, I have this story," and they're all excited and it comes out, but with a flair, kind of a pushy, excite if they have excited news, they can kind of feel it from inside. So, like movie stars quality commentary, the what's the dish kind of thing. Maybe a little bit of gossip, a gossip vibe, maybe, but not necessarily meaning to hurt people, but just more of like that Hollywood vibe of just like, oh, here's the dish or whatever. Yeah, and just to add to that, I think Mercury in Leo is very into telling stories that are funny or fun. So they're like, oh, there's like a fire way of communicating where they're like, oh my God, and they're talking a lot, but it's for playful reasons or, this funny story happened to me. Aries would be more just like in your face, like, oh, but you know, the Leo, it's still fire though. So it has some energy to it. It's got like bravery. It's willing to say something maybe that, you couldn't someone else couldn't say or something like that. Yeah. And it really depends if it's a Cancer sun with Mercury and Leo, that's going to be a different story than a Leo with Mercury and Leo. Do you know any deaf people specifically with Mercury and Leo? Oh, several for sure. I can see where their natural comfort with I can own my space. I can say how I can talk about how I feel, like that kind of Hollywood vibe. they're not worried about other people seeing them. And I would say the story, it is what it is. It is what it is. Okay, it's the moment where I have to show the lion quilt square. Here it is. So cute. Oh my God, it's so cute. I made this for Thorn because they are a Leo rising and they have a Leo rising shirt on. So it's just like Leo time right now. Yeah. So people with Mercury in Leo, that's a total spoiler, by the way, but I just had to show you. I'm like, oh, part of your present is this, whatever. Um, it's like the reveal in small doses. I don't know. Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. Okay, so does that mean that people with Mercury in Leo have it in your first house? And how does that connect with you being a Leo rising? Well, I would say that that rising in Leo, with that Mercury in Leo, the vibe is very similar. It's very similar, but it's more present in the first house. It's more present. It's like I'm here, I'm taking up this space, I'm shining. Um, Whereas if it's a different part in the chart, it would just be expressed in a different way. Like if Mercury in the Leo was in the eighth, it would be very intuitive. Um, but it would be not the same vibe as in the first house. The first house is very present and saying, I'm here, hello, I'm here. In the eighth, it would be more, it would be deep. So yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think. I think that's good enough with Mercury and Leo. Okay, so I think so. So Mercury in Virgo. Okay, Virgo, yes. That's so different than Leo. It's just very like meticulous, It's like, you know, um yeah, and also I feel that because Virgo is very, very service minded, it's very, how can I be here? How can I support you? So their expression with, communicate with Mercury and Virgo would be all about that space of the mental, framework of how can I be here? How can I support you? And it would be very, they would talk about a lot about plants and gardening and maybe talking about working in their yard, herbs, different things like that. Those are the kinds of things that Virgos typically tend to talk about. Or, they could talk about, systems and how to organize things and how to make things beautiful. And that's very Virgo. So their signing would be more affected in that way, where it'd be very precise with how to put the words together and very more slow, but still have its own speed, So I don't know about deaf people with Mercury in Virgo, but I know two astro twin interpreters with Mercury in Virgo, and their signing style is very like like almost transliterating, which is more English style, English, and like systems oriented. It's like what's being said, what's the system, and but gets everything like very precise, and it's like it's not like expressive, it's just very precise, and everything that's being said is being conveyed in this precise way, exactly what they said. It's not like ad verbatim. Yeah, basically ad verbatim, like per words yeah. Yeah, and those people they're hearing, but they're always making lists and we should talk about spatial awareness and different Mercuries. Some okay, in sign language, there's use of space. So you can set things up in space. Let's say you're talking about a circus. You can say there's three rings and there's a circus tent and there's someone over here on the, there's on the thing, and then here there's a tightrope walker, and you can like set it up in space. So you can kind of see that picture when I'm signing. But a Mercury in Virgo doesn't use a lot of space from what I've seen. They're very much like word for word. There is a circus, and in it is three rings. And in the three rings, one has a tightrope walker. But you see, I'm not using that much space. Right. It's more compact, you know, and it's not big like Mercury and Leo or Aries or, more spread out. And yeah, I do think water sign people think more in pictures than other Mercuries. So if somebody has a water Mercury, maybe they use more space and make more pictures. I don't know. I could imagine that, that feeling of Mercury and Pisces, definitely for sure. You know, seeing pictures a lot and describing it, is very creative and, it's all flowing through there. And Cancer, Mercury would be is a little bit different. Yes, there would be pictures, but I would say it depends on where the moon is because the moon really influences it, with the feelings, so what they're describing, what they're actually feeling internally. So, yeah. Um, yeah, I think so. Transliterating for people listening is different than interpreting. So, how would you describe transliterating? Um, how I would describe it is like there's a book and you take out what you read and you think and you process it and you actually translate it, there and how it fits with that context. But interpreting is like language to language translation. It starts, it's more of like how to put that nuance in a way where the person will really understand it in their own language. Yeah. Okay, I'm the interpreter. I'll explain this. So transliterating is like word for word interpretation. Like people sitting in a bus. Transliterating is like people sitting in a bus. But if you interpret it, you kind of make it more into pictures. So you're like people in a bus sitting in rows. Like that's more interpreting. But the Mercury and Virgo is more just making sure all the words, it's very precise and technical. It's like systematized. Yeah, it follows a system. So yeah, they're good interpreters and I can imagine a deaf person with Mercury and Virgo being an accountant or an English or math teacher or something like that, or a librarian, yeah, or a secretary or something with stock or, stock work, something like that. Yeah. So, okay. All right. Mercury in Libra. Libra. Okay. I can imagine that would present in a very artistic, creative relationship way, like beautiful fashion and textiles and textures and sensory things and um those types of spaces, how they draw from that to then express their thoughts. Um, so many, I would imagine Mercury in Libras or Mercury in Pisces, both are very creative. Um, both of them are artists in different ways. So, they're poets, writers, philosophers, Mercury and Libra, I could just imagine that. And they're advocates, they work with politics, activism, activism with, because justice work. So I can imagine that fitting really well with them. Yeah. Yeah, I always think of Mercury and Libra as like a conversational style Mercury. So it does a lot of asking questions, whereas other signs don't really ask a lot of questions. Last night I was chatting with a woman at the deaf social night, and she was saying that her current partner is a Libra, and it makes her crazy because they ask so many questions. And so it's like Mercury and Libra people can talk and then ask a question and then wait for the response and then they go ahead and talk. So it's not a one-way communication style like the Aries Mercury of just like, "Ugh," this is more like talk, talk, talk. Now your turn. Talk, talk, talk. Now your turn. So there's more of a conversation because Libra is about partnering up and collaborating and it wants that interactive nature. So, and also it's interesting because Libra and Gemini share that quality of curiosity, asking questions, but in different ways of how to express that curiosity and that understanding and that back and forth. So let's take a both are air. Yeah, let's take a little bit of a side and talk about how deaf people function in interaction quality. So one time I went to Gallaudet University, it's the deaf university, and I was watching a classroom and the teacher was talking, they were lecturing, and the students were just signing back to the teacher, like all of them were signing back at the same time. And I was like, in our hearing culture, you sit there quietly to show respect. But in deaf culture, they were like talking back or signing back to the teacher and responding at the same time. What do you think of that? Or is that deaf culture? Well, I feel like that's a clear difference because in hearing culture, they have specific ways of how to interact and with education, whereas with deaf culture, we have to make our own space to really, understand because in hearing culture, it's been a long history of colonization of our ways of our learning, how we socialize, how we, you know, uh, communicate. And so that's part of our ways to disconnect from and decolonize. And then we sit in circles and we have visual, interactive, free flow. It doesn't feel limited with that expression. So whereas they have the expectation in hearing culture that you have to sit there and they go down a list and that's appropriate. So yeah. I wonder if Mercury and Libra deaf people both talk at the same time. They're just like both like talking and then they like I don't know. Yeah, I would assume that probably yes. Or they have still have that expression of interactive flow, like how would I say something? How would you say something? Now it's you say something and then we go back and forth like that, So yeah, I think of Mercury and Libra as more of a back and forth Mercury, which is nice for building relationships. I mean, I think, if you talk half the time and you listen half the time, that's wonderful for building relationships. No, for sure. And I feel that a lot of deaf people who have air Mercuries in Gemini or Libra or Aquarius, they have that tendency to be deep thinkers in different ways in how we express it. So, and I think some people who don't expect that because they don't expect us to be that observant. So when we say something, and then we sign it and we put it out there. It's like, I didn't realize that you noticed this small little thing. And it's like, yes, we do notice small little things more than, other people do typically. So it's fascinating. Okay, cool. So Mercury in Scorpio, that's my Mercury. Okay. Do you want to say something about that with Mercury in Scorpio? Well, I don't know about my signing style, but in English, I'm very impactful. Like I say epic things and it's Mercury and Scorpio just likes to like hit hard with its words. It likes to say things that make people like, oh, like mic drop. But I think in sign language, because I'm a water Mercury, I tend to use a lot of pictures. I mean, when I can, or use space a lot. And I don't know. Can you comment about, I don't know, in your case, I think that a big part of your moon in Pisces is overlays on there with your Mercury and Scorpio, but you do have these deep open expressions, but your moon in Pisces overlays on that and adds that kind of flow. It's like a lot of pictures and you do go deep, and say impactful things, but at the same time, there's a lot of pictures and, things like that. Yeah. I think, I mean, I don't know a lot of Scorpio deaf people. Do you? I know several. I know several, yes. There's just very in the beginning they'll be kind of reserved and kind of hardly, sign in an expressive way, but then as they open up, they get really expressive and and they will, really start talking. It's interesting to see that transition when they start because they're kind of reserved because Scorpios tend to be very observant first do I like you? Do I not like you? What's going on? And then as they open up, then they really just open up and then they're really signing and, they'll talk about anything A to Z, any type of topic, but very raw, very visceral, internal, they bring that vibe. So yeah. I don't know. I mean, do some deaf people perseverate on magic topics and occult topics? And I'm sure, I mean, you know, it depends on who, but I do know some that are very, very like alternative people, and they have that vibe of kink, sex, spirituality, magic, all those different overlays and those parts that connect with the expression, So it's fascinating with how it just varies, but it's a common thread. I've noticed, it's like interesting in certain cases. Yeah, Scorpio is very sexy. I mean, come on, come on. That's part of their sign, is that energy of it. Yeah, I'm sure the visual nature of sign language could be fun for sexy signs. I mean, it is. Oh, it is. So it's so much fun. Yes, yeah, yeah. Like there's something called classifiers. Should we talk about classifiers? Yeah, classifiers. In classifiers are like hand shapes that you can use for, related to signs. And, for example, in English, you have one word, but really, there's a big list of meanings. It's the same idea, one hand shape could have many different expressions, it could mean many different things. Like, for example, since we're talking about Mercury and Scorpio, all right, fine. I'll just go ahead and go sexy. Okay. So this is fuck right here. And then also you can use the same shape for laying in bed, sleeping. You know, it's the leg body shape. Like it can be like this or like this. Yeah, yeah. What's this? Come on, it's the same idea. It's 69. Come on. Okay. What? I didn't know. I didn't know. Yeah, that's 69. All right. Okay, what's this? What's this? It depends on where you're going. What's this? Okay, you can be on a slide. You can be on a slide. A water slide. You could, diving, do you feel like you're an ASL tutor right now? Oh no, no. I love talking about any of things like that. My brain is talking about Mercury. That's my Mercury and Gemini. Come on. Okay. Wow, we're fast. We're fast. Okay. Mercury in Sagittarius. Okay. So Sagittarius, I know a few people really closely with this one, but they're English speakers. Okay. I would imagine Sagittarius is fire. And so I can imagine that their vibe is very, very travel oriented, very connected with trance, visioning and, or vision boards or how they put words together or, it's kind of arty, vision board is, it's like, it's similar with what they talk about, setting up space like a map with different countries in it or the world or things like that. So it's a similar idea because Sag is the traveler. So it's like the mental traveler between different areas. So that's how the storytelling goes there. Yeah. So it could be like signing slow and fast at the same time, kind of the alternating that vibe. It depends on how excited they are. Yeah. I've noticed Mercury and Sag people are very like funny. They like to just talk and say funny stuff, like my daughter has Mercury and Sag and she always says things like I'm cooked. Like if something if, like she'd be like, "Oh, and then I was cooked on that," which means that she's in trouble or something like that. But I mean, that's like but it's like they say kind of cool, quirky things. Like they're just like, oh, and then I was like, well, like, so it's like, A Mercury in Sag deaf person might be kind of like have a kind of like what puns? Oh, puns. You know, joking around with puns or riddles or, joker. They're the jokester. Yes, yes, clown. Yeah, the class clown. So tell me about a deaf pun. Do they have them? Okay, deaf jokes. They're deaf jokes. Yeah. So, okay, so I'm sure you know this one. It's one of my favorite ones. Okay, so there's a group and there's the tree cutter people and they're walking through the forest and they're looking for a tree to cut down and they find this tree and so they're looking and they say, okay, chop down the tree. And so they chop down a tree. And then they go to the second tree and they chop it down. And then the third tree, they try to figure out if, the tree, you know, is a good connection for chopping down. So then there's no sound. So they're discussing it and they're like, how do we, interact with this tree? And so one person says, okay, it starts spelling Timber. And then the tree wants, they want the tree to fall down. So finally it fell down when they spelled timber instead of saying timber. They had to finger spell it. So the tree was deaf. Yes, the tree was deaf. Okay, okay. So, okay, that's a good one. Now, what about a deaf pun, though? A deaf pun, oh, I'm not really skilled with puns, but I can ask some of my friends and bring a pun next time. Okay. But I do think Mercury in Sag people, deaf or hearing, are going to be more of the Joker type, just saying shit, just like yeah, they're kind of shit talkers, shit signers. And then also they are kind of philosophical, like or religion or philosophy sometimes is a topic, things like that, more radical with their perspective. Religion, spirituality, dogma, things like that for sure. Okay, cool. We have three left. Three left. Okay. Well, let's do it. Okay. Mercury in Capricorn. I can see that that is like the teacher type of person. you know. They're more elevated teacher, where they're very, work related and the systems related and how everything works together. And they sign a kind of formal way, and they put these sentences together and they sign in a formal way. Because Capricorn is very, very formal and very kind of parsimonious with its structure and they can't kind of go off the point. So, they have a work ethic that's very strong. So Mercury and Cab is like maybe they would look tense. Maybe they're very tense and they want to get things the right way. Yeah. You're making me think of the concept of register. Have you heard of that concept? Register? In interpret, yes, I have heard of that. So as an interpreter, we work to try to fit the register with the context we're interpreting in. So there's a high level register, which is very formal way of talking. We use like no, it's like instead of saying like China, well, invaded the US, so they would say the US was invaded by China. Like there's just like different ways to have a high register of talking. And so I think that yeah, it's like academic. Yeah. So I think what you're saying speaks to whereas like Mercury and Sag would have a low register where they're just like, oh, and they're just saying stuff, where the Mercury and Capricorn is this high register, like very formal. It makes me think of people in boardrooms or higher academic education. Yeah. I would love to see a deaf board and how they talk. Oh, it's fun. It's fun to watch. Okay. So what does the higher register of sign language like look like? What makes it different than, like regular register? Regular registers is a good example of our conversation, what we're doing. We're just have a regular flow. But for formal register, they're more if they're in the academic world, their higher education, it's just high level of, how to discuss things, how to interact, uh, you know, how to divide up that space and how it's set up with, the story and the expression and the listening and and the role of where everything is set up. So uh ASL is very high register. It's more ordered and more like we deaf people tend to code switch, where we will code switch to match the space that we're in if it's a regular space, but if it's a higher level, we'll code switch and have more appropriate formal, to match our academic environment or education or science, or it depends on what the field is. So yeah. So I can speak from an interpreter's perspective. I know that higher register sign language is more English, but that's because not because English is more respectable, but because we're often tied to slides that are very more language, on the slide and in English, and like or like legal language is very formal, and so it doesn't really make pictures in your mind when you read it. It makes, it's like it's kind of thing. Right. And I would say something controversial here, which is that it's true. But again, that's a thing here of where in the higher register ASL language expression, there's an expectation that a sub-level of English is there, and that's required in order to match the register. And I think I typically personally feel that that's wrong. Um, because with that expectation to match, it still shows a history of English as a colonization and, our nature, being taken from us. So we feel that we must match even in a higher register. And, it's like, I don't know, that's their, um, I think that's wrong. Yeah. At the same time, I get where it's sticky and how to deal with that because they're setting up the rules, and the ASL, we have different rules in our, with our language because it's visual and it's pictorial, and English doesn't have that. So it's very flat. So it's just there's these differences and it's kind of sticky. Yeah. And I don't know if hearing people are trying to oppress deaf people in that situation. I think it's linguistic myself. I mean, I understand it's a controversial issue and we don't have to agree, but as a linguist, I just know that the language of high register places makes less pictures, legalese, it makes very few pictures for the interpreter or the deaf person. Like when you read it, it's just it doesn't make pictures. But if it was a high registered doctor's office, maybe I would be signing in pictures about the brain and all this stuff. So it kind of depends on how many pictures are offered by the text, for sure. And I can see that. And at the same time, coming from the view of where, again, with that history, of where it's which is correct, with the language and the rules and the expectations, it's where the pure situation is. Yeah, that's my feedback. Well, I'd be interested to see a high register place where there are no hearing people. What's that look like? It's like all deaf people. I'm curious to analyze the language there. Okay, let's move on. Okay, Mercury and Aquarius. That one's interesting to me, even in English. It's like it's a very politically minded Mercury and very theoretical. It's like it talks in kind of theories and discusses issues in a very topical, like topic based politics way. I don't know. What do you think about the deaf perspective on that? The deaf perspective with Mercury in Aquarius is, I would say, it's very research based. It's very information based and you know, where is everything taken from? Like, it's like a puzzle. And so, or in science, where there's discussing with scientific evidence and concepts and theories and, all those different types of things. Because Aquarius typically is a thinker. It's the inventor. So so I think it's out of the box. And I would say that it's more radical if you think about this. It's more of a, what do you think about this? And it's like, right, because they're out of the box thinkers. I've never thought about that in this way. And what would they, think about because of their Mercury there. So yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think maybe, yeah, I can see where they take theories or thought structures because it's like fixed thought. So it's like the fixed thoughts that exist, and then they like, fight against those thoughts or agree with those thoughts. So it's like thinking in terms of the group's thoughts. Maybe they focus on deaf culture, because of what deaf culture says, because that's the Mercury in Aquarius, like the cultural aspect to the Mercury, you know. And in deaf culture, we do have our own approach with debate. We do have our own, approach with it's not only debate, but also mind games of like in the deaf school, they have one event called if I remember right, it's called Minds Game or Minds Bowl, of where they have a competition and where they have different types of activities related to the mind and discussions and conversations, and they go back and forth in different formats. And but in our sign language space, it's not following the English format. It's so that type of environment is so different because it's our specific, it's in our specific flavor of that. I can see where like Mercury and Aquarius is good at trivia. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, or game shows, or game nights, playing things like that. Yeah. Okay, last one. All right, this tired me out. Wow. Okay, Mercury in Pisces, the very picture-based Mercury in Pisces. I wonder if Mercury in Pisces is better for deaf people. In like sign language would lend itself to Mercury in Pisces better than English, I think. Why do you think that? Because it's picture based, and many Mercury and Pisces think in pictures too. That's why it's Mercury in detriment. It's not really happy there, quote unquote, because you're supposed to think in this kind of linear, fashion, but the Mercury in Pisces is always like imagining everything. So I think it'd be good for sign language. I can see that where it could be good. At the same time, I could imagine that a deaf person who has Mercury in Pisces could typically have language deprivation, or, um, the Mercury is kind of challenging of how to express itself, or how the mind is blocked inside and how has to figure out how to express itself. But it does get pictures, but it could kind of get stuck feeling how to really express things. So for sure, yeah. I wonder if there's an ethereal tendency with the Mercury and Pisces. Like I know hearing people with that tend to talk about yoga and astrology and divinity and God, and so maybe some yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe some deaf preachers have, Mercury in Pisces and what's I wonder what that register looks like the preacher, the deaf preacher, what that looks like. Yeah, it really depends on which part of religion, which aspect of religion. I have seen several different types and where there's on the West Coast, there's more casual, more down to earth, laid back, and more willing to be chill. On the East Coast, or South, it's very to the point, very expressive, and it's not poetic, but it's more of like this is the what is it says, this is what the Bible says, and I'm just putting it out there. And so I think it's different, it's a different vibe with each, part of the US, each area, and also, it gives that vibe as well. So yeah. I wonder if I know one Mercury in Pisces deaf person, and she talks about auras a lot. She's psychic, and she talks about ghosts and spirits and auras and chakras. And so I learned a lot of my spiritual signs from her. And so that she's a Mercury in Pisces and it's very, very spiritual signs, So yeah. So. Well, in our last 2 minutes, do you have any last comments about Mercury in general or sign language in general or anything? Well, Mercury in general controls Gemini, it rules Gemini and Virgo. So that is influences, the Gemini and Virgo to be good communicators, and that's our natural ruler. So, Mercury there. So, but in general, with, technical things, travel, transportation, how to, the thought process and expression, those are all general Mercury context things. But if we want to be specific, then it'd be those Gemini and Virgo are the communicators of the zodiac. So, and because Mercury's at home there, it rules it. So they're comfortable, it's at home. Yeah. All right, well, this is a great conversation. I've been wanting to have that conversation for a long time. So, for sure. All right. Well, maybe it's your turn to think of something for next week. I don't know. Okay, yes. Um, well, since Monday is a full moon in Scorpio, maybe we could talk about that next week. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Thorn. It's great to see you. All right. Thank you, Andy. It's good to see you. Have a good weekend. You too. All right. Bye.